Since the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan in 2021, women and girls have lost most of their basic rights, including access to education, employment, and freedom of movement. These restrictions have created a serious humanitarian crisis that affects millions of people and limits the country's development. This is an international problem because it involves serious human rights violations that concern the global community. It has increased the need for humanitarian aid, forced many people to flee the country, and prompted international organizations to call for the protection of Afghan government's rights. This topic was selected because it highlights one of the most severe humanitarian and human rights crises affecting women today. Studying the loss of women's rights in Afghanistan provides a better understanding of the consequences of gender-based discrimination under authoritarian rule. It also emphasized the importance of international cooperation in protecting human rights, promoting gender equality, and supporting vulnerable populations during times of political conflict and humanitarian emergencies. The main objective of this research is to analyze the humanitarian situation of women in Afghanistan by examining the loss of their rights and its impact on Afghan society. It also aims to identify the main restrictions imposed on women since the Taliban returned to power, examine the social and humanitarian consequences of these measures, analyze the response of the international community, and emphasize the importance of protecting women's rights as fundamental human rights.
Hi teacher, I'm Martin and I'm going to talk about the situation about the restriction on women's rights on Afghanistan, where this situation is the result of decades of war, political instability, and change in government during the 1920s and again in the 1960s. Women gained important rights such as access to education, employment, and voting. However, these advances did not last because of continuous conflict. In 1989, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, starting a long period of war. After the Soviet withdrawal in 1989, the country entered a civil war, and the Taliban took control in 1996. During the first government, women were banned from attending school, working in most jobs, and participating in public life. In 2001, after the US-led intervention, the Taliban lost power, and women regained many of their rights. Millions of girls returned to school, more women attended universities, and many joined the workforce. However, in August 2021, the Taliban returned to power. Since then, they have banned girls from studying beyond the sixth grade, prohibit women from attending universities, limit their employment opportunities, and restrict their freedom of movement. These measures have been widely condemned by the international community as serious violation of human rights.
The main political cause of the conflicts was the Taliban's return to power in 2021 after the withdrawal of US troops. Since then, the new government has removed institutions that protect women's rights and introduced laws that restrict their education, employment, and participation in public life. The economic crisis became worse after the Taliban returns to power because international aid decreased and poverty increased. In addition, many workers lost their jobs or were no longer able to work, affecting their families and slowing the country's economic development. Gender inequality, which already exists in Afghanistan, became even stronger under the new restrictions. Women and girls face limits on studying, working, traveling, and participating in public activities, increasing their exclusion from society. The conflict is also related to Taliban's strict interpretation of Islamic law and the influence of conservative in traditions. These factors have been used to justify rules that limit women's freedom, education, and participation in society.
The human rights crisis affecting women in Afghanistan involves different actors, including responsibility for the violations and those who work to protect human rights. The main actor is Taliban, which returned to power in 2021. Since then, they have implemented policies that restrict women's rights, such as banning girls from higher education, limiting employment opportunities, and reducing women participation in public life. These actions have been considered serious violations of human rights and gender equality. Another important actor is Afghan authorities under Taliban control. They are responsible for applying the restrictions through government institutions and security forces, creating an environment where women have fewer freedoms and face penalties for not following these rules. Other actors include extremist groups and some conservative religions and community leaders. They contributed to discrimination by promoting restrictive tradition, using intimidation, and limiting women's access to education, work, and social participation. On the other hand, international organizations such as the United Nations, UN Women, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch work to document human rights violations, provide humanitarian assistance, and promote the protection of the women's rights. Finally, Afghan women and civil society organizations play a very important role despite facing threats and persecution. They continue fighting for equality, education, and fundamental freedoms. In conclusion, this conflict involves both actors who restrict women's rights and those who working continues to defend team protecting women's rights, and in Afghanistan requires international cooperation and continued support.
Political objective: the Taliban main political objective is the main control of Afghanistan through interpretation of Islamic law since 2021. It introduced restriction of government education, employment, and participation in public life. In contrast, the international community should protect human rights and promote gender equality. You can explain that the conflict is not only about women rights, but also about political power. Interest of each actor. The Taliban wants to preserve in political power and extremely in government. Afghan women seek to recover their rights, including education, work, and freedom of movement. The United Nations and humanitarian organizations focus on the protecting human rights and providing assistance. You can mention that every actor has different priorities. The Taliban focus on maintaining authority, while Afghan women and international organizations on rights and humanitarian protection. Economic and strategic international. You can explain that excluding women from the workforce affect the world countries because fewer people can contribute to the economic. Also, Afghanistan situation is important international because instability can create security problem in neighboring countries. Recurs or territories in dispute. You can clarify that Afghanistan does not have a traditional territorial conflict like other countries. The main dispute is about who controls the countries and how it is governed. However, its natural recourse could be important for future economic development.
Hi, my name is Melanie, and to continue to talk to the latest conflict, the conflict over the women right in the Afghanistan became more serious in the 1996 with the Taliban first look the control of the country granted to rule women those main fundamental rights, including the right to study, work, and practice in the daily life. After the Taliban government fell in 2001, the situation worsened significantly in the girls recommended to school and women given to sexual education and the employment and they were too late to practice the politics and public life again. May event related to conflict, something the most important events, including the Taliban first come to power and the police education of the woman. In 1996, the Taliban government fell, allowing the woman to gain the military rights in 2001. Afghanistan adopted a new country that regulated equally girls and the men and the women in 2004, the 201 and 2021. Women participation in education, employment, and political increments. About in 2021, the dynamic to the power. In the same time, women have the brand secondary school and university restricted over many jobs, including permanent expected daily life. Pre-invasion attracts the country situation. Before the Taliban returned to the power, several pre-invasions took place. One of the most important was the dual agreements in the 2020, which allowed the bring base to Afghanistan. However, it did not agree to the protection of women's rights. Today, international organizations such as the United Nations and UN Women continue to call of the restoration of the women's rights despite international pressure. Most of the restrictions remain in place, yet the result of Afghanistan career force on the world's most serious women's rights and the human rights crash.
Okay, I will talk about the consequence that Afghan women have faced since the Taliban returned to power in 2021. And one of the biggest consequences has been the loss of basic rights, because women are not longer allowed to study beyond sixth grade or attend university. They also face many restrictions on working, traveling without a male guardian, and participating in public life. These rules have greatly limit their freedom and independence. Another important consequence is the impact on education, because middle girls have been forced to leave school, which means they cannot continue learning or prepare for future careers. This affects not only their personal development, but also the future of Afghanistan, because the country is losing many talented and educated women. And while the economy has also suffered, because many women have lost their jobs and many families have lost an important source of income, since women can no longer fully participate in the workforce, Afghanistan economic growth has low and poverty has increased. And these restrictions have also had a serious psychological and social impact because many women experience anxiety, depression, stress, and fear because they have lost many opportunities and freedoms. And well, in addition, they have become more isolated from society and have fewer chance to participate in their communities. And all of these consequences affect not only Afghan women but also the entire country because when half of the population can study, work, or contribute freely, the country's development, economy, and future are seriously affected.
After the Taliban returned to power in 2021, the United Nations strengthened its response to Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis. Through UNAMA, it monitors human rights violations and reports them to the Security Council. The UN strongly condemned the restriction on women and girls, while agents such as UNICEF, WFP, UNHCR, and WHO continue providing food, healthcare, education support, and emergency assistance. Besides the United Nations, other international organizations have also played an important role. UN Women protects women's rights, while Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch document human rights abuse. The International Committee of the Red Cross provides humanitarian assistance, and the European Union supports relief programs while maintaining pressure on the Taliban. The international community has also imposed sanctions, including travel bans, asset freezes, and arms embargoes, to pressure Taliban leaders. Although these measures have affected Afghanistan's economy, humanitarian exemption allow international organizations to continue delivering essential aid to civilians. Finally, the international community has prioritized diplomacy over military intervention. The United Nations continue organizing international meetings, and Qatar has acted as a key mediator between the Taliban and other countries. However, progress remains limited because the Taliban continue rejecting many international demands, especially those concerning with the women's rights.
Continue with the topic, I will present a critical analysis of the conflict in Afghanistan. Since the Taliban returned to power in 2021, the conflict has remained unresolved. The main reason is that the Taliban continue to reject many international human rights standards, especially those related to women's rights. They believe these restrictions are part of their interpretation of Islamic law, which makes dialogue with the international community very difficult. Because of this, millions of Afghan women and girls still face discrimination and have limited access to education, employment, and public life. Another important change is the lack of cooperation between the Taliban and the international community. The Taliban have refused to protect women's rights and have limited opportunities for dialogue. At the same time, the United Nations and many countries have condemned these policies and imposed sanctions. However, these actions have not been enough to create meaningfully change or improve the daily lives of Afghan women. This shows that solving the conflict requires more than criticism. It also needs cooperation and long-term solutions. In addition, this situation is similar to the one in Iran, where women also face restrictions on their rights. In both countries, women have organized peaceful protests to demand equality, and international organizations have condemned these situations. However, the restrictions in Afghanistan are generally more severe, especially in education and employment, where many women and girls are completely excluded. Overall, the issues of women and human rights in Afghanistan is extremely complex because it is deeply influenced by the country's religious and political systems, making lasting change very difficult to achieve.
Objective reduced
the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan through international cooperation with improving women and girls' access to education, healthcare, employment, and basic rights. And diplomatic actions, it's promote regular dialogue between the Afghanistan authorities, the United Nations, and other countries, with an international mediator. Multilateral agreements create an international agreement and a global fund to support education, healthcare, and economic development. And economic and social reforms support vocational training, women entrepreneurship, education for girls, and stranger healthcare. International organization, the United Nations coordinates negotiations with NGOs and financial institutions provide humanitarian aid. Timeline 0 to 6 months. Begin dialogue, sign agreements, and increase humanitarian aid. 6 to 18 months. Launch education, healthcare, and employment programs. And 18 to 36 months. Evaluate the progress and expand development initiatives.
Justification of the proposal. Why is the proposal feasible? The proposal combines diplomacy, international cooperation, and gradual reforms, making it more likely to be accepted and successfully implemented. The benefits women and girls will gain better access to education, healthcare, and jobs. Afghanistan will receive international support, while the global community will help promote stability and human rights. And the risks and limitations challenge include resistance to reform, security concerns, and limited resources. These risks can be reduced through continued international cooperation and monitoring. In conclusion, supporting women's access to education, employment, and healthcare will not only improve the quality of life but will also contribute to Afghanistan's stability, economic growth, and long-term peace, and coordinate international efforts together with the active participation of Afghan society is essential to create a more inclusive, secure, and prosperous future for the country. In the future recommendations, it's recommended to maintain international support, strengthen cooperation among governments and international organizations, and continually monitor the implementation of agreements to ensure lasting progress in protecting women's rights and promoting Afghanistan's recovery. Thanks for listening.